when the election happens. And of course you can hear all the election results right here on KDHL, just as you have for many, many, many moons. In fact, our 70th anniversary is coming up in a couple of years. I can only imagine that every single election results have been given here on KDHL. I know I'll be here 30 years in June of next year. I've certainly been in every one of those elections and giving those results here on the mighty 920. Our guest today is Jim Hagedorn. He's a U.S. congressional candidate in District 1. And maybe first of all, Jim, I'll have you outline where the district covers, if you would, please.
Oh, Gordy, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Terrific to have you.
First District, Minnesota, starts South Dakota, goes all the way to Wisconsin, and then the Iowa line up about 80 miles. So this is the northern tip of the district right here in Rice County.
Yeah, we are. The very northern tip, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. We have about 2/5 of Rice County. It's the other part over in Northfield is in the 2nd District. So.
Yeah, in fact, Webster Township is split in half, if I remember right.
Well, how about that? Yeah, that's too bad how they split up communities like that.
I don't understand that. Part of it is in the 1st Congressional District, and part of it is in the 2nd Congressional District.
But we're happy to be here in Faribault. So.
Oh, yeah, and it's good to have you here. You're the endorsed Republican candidate for the seat.
Yes, yes. You know, our party is energized and unified behind our campaign, and we're excited. We've been running a strong race across the district, and we're excited to get out and talk about the issues.
And did run a couple of years back.
I did. I was on the ballot in 2014. We held the incumbent Tim Walz to a 54-46 result, and so we've had 2 more years of campaigning across the district, organizing. We have, like I said, the party energized, unified, and then the issues of this campaign, the big national issues, have caught up with my issue positions. We talk a lot about terrorism and border security. We talk a lot about Obamacare and too much government in the economy, bogging it down, and then a lot about veterans and our God-given rights like the Second Amendment. So,
evidently, you had a good feeling after the last election, or you wouldn't have done this again.
Well, sometimes in a big district like this, 21 counties, it takes a challenger, a couple of election cycles to get around the district, to organize, get better known. Colin Peterson, the congressman up in the 7th District, Minnesota, a Democrat, he ran 4 times against my old boss, Congressman Stangland. And John Klein, for instance, who represents the 2nd District, he ran 3 times. So there's a little bit of a precedent in Minnesota that if you get out there and keep shaking hands, as we have, I think I've shaken over 100,000 hands in just this campaign, and we walked 47 parades, went to 20 of the 21 county fairs. So we're getting out and meeting the people, and that's very important.
Which county fair did you miss?
I missed the Fillmore County Fair. Just couldn't get there. The schedule wouldn't permit it. So, in the 3 years that I've run for this seat, out of the 63 possible county fairs, I went to 62 of them. Just missed the one.
Yeah, Fillmore County is where I grew up.
Oh, well, good people down there.
They have a nice fair.
Good people down there.
No, I know. Well, we got about a minute left before you have to hit a market update, so we really can't delve too much into the issues yet. If you have a question, I'd appreciate your texting it. And again, we'd like to keep this issue oriented. If it's not an issue in your question, I won't ask it. That's simple. You just want to keep it to the issues. 507-838-5233 is the number to text your question to. It can be about the economy, about agriculture, it can be about gun control, whatever you want to talk about. The tax code simplification, I see that Jim has an idea on that. We'll talk about that when AM Minnesota continues. Also, he would like to protect the Second Amendment, replace Obamacare with real reforms to drive down the cost of health care. Those are some of the things we'll get Jim's thoughts on when AM Minnesota continues.
Service. Call 583-2144. Metal Service is a Blooming Prairie serving the farming community for over 30 years.
AM Minnesota continues. Jim Hagedorn, who's a candidate for Congress in the 1st Congressional District, is our guest. Thought I got a text here. 507-838-5233 is the number to text your question to. Jim, thanks for coming in from Blue Earth, all the way from Blue Earth, Minnesota.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yep, this is what we do every day, travel the district and hopefully talk the issues.
We do appreciate your being with us. What would you say is the most asked question when you go out and about door knock? You said you shook hands with 100,000 people.
You know, it comes down to pretty much where the big national issues are. People are concerned about security and their safety. They talk a lot about the refugee programs, the terrorism issues with ISIS. And then they get into programs like Obamacare. I think Obamacare actually is the issue that comes up the most. It's affected people very personally. It's, you know, put families where they've lost their savings. People have had to take jobs or lose jobs based on health insurance. The program is a disaster, and it's really hurt the people. And Congressman Walz voted for that bill. I think it's the worst vote he'll ever take. They made lots of promises about it. Keep your doctor, keep your plan, save $2,500. You know, he said he'd live under it just like you. You know, none of that's turned out to be true. And I think people are looking for solutions and changes, you know, in the free market. Get back to where we should be on that. And then lastly, the farm economy. I mean, the farm economy is very tight. Commodity prices are low. We're looking at a 20-year low for income. And farmers are upset that Washington keeps dumping regulations, taxes, high energy costs, all these things that don't need to be happening, making it tougher on our farmers and our rural businesses and our smaller communities. So those are the kind of the three big areas that people talk about.
What would you do concerning health care?
Well, I think what we need to do are the reforms that Republicans, quite frankly, should have put in place 10 or 15 years ago when they controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. And we have to get back to where we have competition across state lines. Competition can help drive down costs and provide the services that people need. We should expand things like health savings accounts. So people are holding their own money. It would encourage people to shop for routine medical care. And then people can be rewarded for healthy living. Right now, what's the reward for healthy living? You just pay a whole bunch more for everybody else. We should keep separate pools for people with pre-existing conditions, so we don't want people to go broke and so forth. We want to make sure that everybody gets care, especially if they have expensive medical needs. And then give tax credits directly to people so they can go out and purchase their own health care, not necessarily rely on the employer-based system. That way people would have portable benefits. They could go from job to job or have benefits in times of unemployment or special circumstances. So those are some of the reforms that I support. On my website, jimhagedorn.org, we go through all the reforms that I offer, and we talk about the differences between Congressman Walz and myself. I mean, frankly, he voted for a very bad bill, and he hasn't come back and even talked to the people about it. He certainly owes everyone an apology for the promises that he made that turned out not to be true.
Don't most people get their insurance from the workplace?
A lot of people do, but even the people who are getting it through the workplace are being affected by Obamacare. The rates are going up. Effectively, what happened in Minnesota is this was very unnecessary. Minnesota had a pretty good plan before Obamacare. We had 93% covered in Minnesota. We had special circumstances for people with pre-existing conditions. All Obamacare did is drive up the cost, and now we have inferior care. And you hear this all across. It's not just individuals, it's not just business people, but it's people who are working for small businesses, working for medium-sized businesses. Even union people have come to me and said, you know, we bargained for very good health benefits, and now the government's going to come in and tax us on them because our benefits are too good. They're concerned. I mean, across the board, you have nurses on strike effectively over the fact that their cost of health insurance is going up. So unfortunately, this is a problem that's affected a great number of people. You know, we were told you could keep your plan. Hey, Blue Cross Blue Shield just sent out a couple months ago 104,000 notices to families in Minnesota that they're getting out that you can't keep your plan. It's really hurt the people, and it's unfortunate.
Under your proposal, though, wouldn't businesses say, hey, they can get their own insurance? Why are we in the insurance business?
Well, I mean, they do that now. I mean, you're talking about small businesses? Is that where you're going with that? But we just have to have competition. If you have competition across the whole country where people are offering products and services, I think we have a better chance. All I can tell you is this program, this Obamacare, very unnecessary, and it's not working. And we need to, I would replace it with the free market reforms that we outline on my website.
Again, if you have a question, please text it to us at 507-838-5233. 507-838-5233. It moves the program along quicker, I do believe, when you text your questions. You also, as long as we're talking about healthcare, I see on a list of some of the things you'd like to see changed in our nation's capital, would like to let veterans choose their own doctors and hospitals.
Absolutely. I think what we've seen with the VA, these last 8 years, 16 years, whatever, it's not working for veterans. Unfortunately, people are slipping through the cracks. When my opponent, Tim Walz, went to Washington, he promised he'd make things better. And he's a veteran himself. I honor his service, but the fact is, his service hasn't translated into informed votes on the House floor, and veterans are worse off today than when he went out there. Two solutions that I offer that Congressman Walz opposes. One is to make the VA accountable in that if a VA employee makes a mistake, hurts a veteran, that employee should be fired and demoted expeditiously within 30 or 60 days. That's called the VA Accountability Act. I support that. Tim Walz voted against the VA Accountability Act, and he said it was a right-to-work issue for the VA government bureaucrats. And I said, no, it was a right-to-life issue for our veterans. So that's one difference and one solution that I offer. The other is, I think at this point in time, we just need to open it up and let every veteran choose their own doctor and hospital to get the quality, timely care that they deserve, that they've earned. And I think if we did that, we'd have a better chance of making sure that our veterans are taken care of properly. And it's a very important issue for me.
Strong defense. Are you in favor of a strong defense?
Well, I'm a peace through strength guy like Ronald Reagan. And President Reagan showed in the 80s that you can rebuild our military, you can project out strength, you can defeat our enemies, and do so without necessarily getting into ground wars of diminishing returns. President Reagan really didn't commit any troops to combat during his administration, yet we defeated the Soviet Union, and we were out there projecting our values and supporting our allies. So yeah, I'm a peace through strength guy. I think we need to have the strongest defense in the world by far, so nobody threatens us or nobody even thinks about coming against us. And we also need to be better about promoting and supporting stable governments around the world, particularly in the Middle East. What's been going on here under the Obama administration is we very much have destabilized the Middle East. The pullout in Iraq, the way that was done, left a vacuum filled by ISIS. The killing of Gaddafi in Libya left a vacuum. Now ISIS is there, massive refugee problems. Gaddafi hadn't caused us any troubles in 25 years. He was a relatively stable leader. He wasn't a great guy. But what we have now, because of Hillary Clinton's war there that Congressman Walz voted for, is a complete chaos and problem. So, we need to support stable governments in the Middle East, and I think when you look at what's been going on in the last 8 years, it's just complete chaos. The rise of ISIS, the rise of Islamic radicalism, the slaughter of Christians, and the loss of U.S. prestige is just a disaster.
What do we do there then?
Well, like I said, I think our goal in the Middle East should always be to support stable governments, whether they're secular governments. We need governments that we should be either befriend or be neutral actors with, who will be as benevolent to their people as possible, people who will help us fight the Islamic terrorists, people who will help us keep the free flow of oil going, people who will allow as much religious freedom as possible. I mean, look what's happened in Syria, Libya, and other places. The Christians are basically run out of there, just slaughtered. And there are areas in Egypt and other places where 10-20% of the population was Christian. It's becoming a situation in the Middle East where Christianity isn't really even allowed to be worshipped anymore.
Do we need immigration reform?
Yes, our borders are not secure. I've been running on this issue very strong all along, and Tim Walz has this kind of pre-9/11 mindset that we should have open borders. We should be bringing in massive refugees from countries that hate America under this. Let's face it, we have a system right now on refugees that has led to a terrorist recruiting problem in Minnesota and across the country. We have a problem. I've called for a refugee program timeout to try to figure out what's going on. I also believe we should have safe zones in the Middle East and that in those types of areas, so we can protect and help the refugees and try to repatriate them to their home countries. But this is a very clear difference between Congressman Walz and myself. Like I said, a pre-9/11 mindset. He supports closing Guantanamo Bay. He even has suggested we're going to bring those Islamic terrorists from Guantanamo Bay into the United States for trial and relocate them in Rochester, Minnesota's Federal Medical Center. He said the professionals there could handle it. His idea was so ridiculous that Amy Klobuchar, the senator, went on TV and rebuked him. But I tell people that we should keep Guantanamo Bay open, We shouldn't be bringing Islamic terrorists like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, into the United States. We certainly don't want them anywhere close to Rochester and southern Minnesota. We should be giving the Islamic terrorists the last rights, not Miranda rights, and that's the difference between Tim Walz and myself on that issue.
Do we need a wall on our southern border?
We need to make sure that we're protected and people can't penetrate our border, because when we deport people, like criminals and others, we don't want them running back over the border. So whether that's a wall or a fence or whatever it takes, we need people in Washington with the will to get that done, and who will stay focused on that. 10 years ago, my opponent ran on that issue. He said, "Oh, we're going to secure the borders and all that." The borders are not secure. We had a debate in Rochester on KAL TV just last week in which Tim Walz argued that the borders were secured. And I said, absolutely not. And most of the American people, including even I think the President of the United States, do not believe that our borders are secure. So just a fundamental disagreement between Tim Walz and myself on that issue.
Jim Hagedorn again is a endorsed Republican candidate for Congress in Minnesota's 1st Congressional District. If you have a question, please text it to us at 507-838-5233, 507-838-5233. We won't deal with clicking the buttons to get people on the air, that sort of thing. It's much quicker, I've found, when people text questions. I just read the text, and there we go.
Well, you're trendy. You're trendy here.
No, I don't know if you're trendy, but again, it's quicker, I think.
Sure.
507-838-5233 is the number to text your question if you have a question for Jim Hagedorn. Second Amendment, that's talked about a lot around here, I know.
Yeah, the Second Amendment's on the ballot because if Hillary Clinton wins this election, she's going to appoint radicals to the Supreme Court who will first and foremost take away our individual right to keep and bear arms. And people ask me who I support in the election. There's no contest. I support Trump because he's going to put people on the Supreme Court to try to keep our Constitution moving the way the forefathers put it together. People say, do we need more gun laws? I say no. I mean, I do receive a rating from the NRA and Gun Owners of America and others, and I think there's enough laws on the books. I think we just have to prosecute the criminals, keep them off the streets, and make sure that our right to keep and bear arms is protected. It's a very important issue to me, and I'd fight for that for the people.
Energy. Where do you think we ought to go in the area of energy?
Well, we need to be energy independent in the United States, and we're not right now. The only source of energy that we need to have more of is crude oil. And so what's the pathway to get there? We're going to have to drill in some areas like Alaska and elsewhere, and we're also going to have the energy infrastructure, the pipelines, the distribution points, the refineries, in order to properly utilize our energy resources and keep downward pressure on cost. If we have lower cost energy, then we're more competitive around the world. Our businesses do better. Our consumers have more money in their pockets to live better lives and to spend money on other things. High cost energy, what we've seen through the Obama administration and these global warming policies that Tim Walz supports, putting the screws to coal and a carbon tax, the clean power plan, all these things that he's voted for are going to drive up the cost of energy needlessly, take money out of people's pockets, harm our economy. And so I support very much U.S. energy independence.
Would you be in favor of a flat tax?
Yeah, I support tax simplification and fairness in a big way. And here's the concept. The Washington bureaucrats, politicians, and interest groups shouldn't be the ones coaxing everybody how to spend, save, hold, invest their own money. It should be the people. So I'd like to take the power from Washington and give it back to the people and have a tax system that makes sense. So either a flat tax with very few deductions, so people are out there making their own choices, or some sort of a consumption tax. Some people call it the fair tax. I'd be open to either big, bold policy. And it's just that we have to make sure that we take the power and the ability for people to hold their own money and give it back to them. Right now, there's too much influence from Washington, too much special interests that have their hand in the till, and that place isn't working for us right now. It's time to take back our country.
You mentioned earlier that you thought there's too much government involved in our lives. I guess I've always wondered why the federal government's even involved in education.
Yeah, that's been a big issue actually in the presidential race, and we talk about it. And My plan there again is, how do you take power from Washington and give it back to the states and the people? In the area of education, it means taking whatever monies are being spent in Washington, distributing them back to the states, and encouraging the states as best as possible to handle their own affairs. I support the concept of people being able to send their children to the schools of their choice. And if the money follows the students rather than the students following the money, I think in the long run we're going to have more opportunities for students and better education, particularly in the inner cities where we've seen failure after failure for decade after decade. And so I'm very much a school choice person. I believe that the parents should be empowered, and so I would fight for as limited a government as possible at the national level in order to empower representatives and senators here in Minnesota, the governor, and then of course the people at the most basic local level.
So then, if I'm hearing you right, the money would go, instead of to the schools for these students, it would go to the parents to go to whatever school they chose.
That's correct. It'd be competition, and I think that would help all involved.
Be in form of a voucher or what?
However they'd want to do it, it'd be up to the states in order to figure out their process. But from someone who would be a national member of Congress, I would just like to see that authority sent back to the states and to the people.
This is a very rural district, the first congressional district, right?
Yes.
What are you hearing from farmers as you go out and about?
Well, agriculture is the backbone of our economy here in southern Minnesota, and the farmers unfortunately are hurting. Agribusinesses are hurting. Our rural communities are struggling. And what they're hearing, what they're feeling is that there's too much government, too many regulations coming out of Obama's EPA, FDA, USDA, and we need regulatory reform. And that's a big difference between Tim Walz and Jim Hagedorn. The congressman doesn't support the bill that the Republicans put out there that said the U.S. Congress should decide major regulations, not the EPA, for instance. That bill's called the REINS Act. I support its passage. Colin Peterson, the Democrat in our neighboring 7th district, supports passage. Tim Walz votes against it repeatedly. So, the farmers are upset with those regulations. Obamacare is a huge cost to them, and when commodity prices are low and the farmers are struggling, they're starting to look around for every dollar, and they don't understand why they're paying $25,000 a year for premiums with deductibles so high the underlying insurance is worthless. They also don't like high priced energy. That hurts them dramatically. And then something called the death tax. Why in the world would a congressman who represents our rural 1st district vote for the death tax? But Walz did. We need to get rid of that. We don't need farmers and small business people selling out and leaving the land and leaving our communities. We want to maintain family farming and family businesses as best as possible.
Are there some other issues that I didn't bring up that maybe you want to touch on here?
Well, you always hit everything, Gordy. I mean, we're having a great time out there meeting people and talking about the issues. The bottom line is that Tim Walz has had 10 years in Washington, D.C., and he has no record of solving any of the big issues. In fact, his votes for Obamacare, his votes for cap and trade energy, his votes for all the spending, we have a $20 trillion debt. These things have made our country worse. And we're out talking about solutions on the border to make sure we have security there. Solutions with the refugee program. Take a time out and figure it out so we can protect our country from Islamic supremacists. Solutions on the economy. Tax reform, regulatory reform, U.S. energy independence. And then solutions with our veterans. Let them choose their own doctors and hospitals. And finally, protecting our God-given rights. The right to life, the right to keep and bear arms, the right to religious freedom being the 3 primary rights that I would be out there defending each and every day as the people's representative.
Aren't some of those, I'm just going to bring up the border, I mean, if you put up a wall or a fence or whatever you put up, it's going to cost money, right?
Sure.
Wouldn't that add to the deficit?
It's costing us money now, though. When people come over and then we have to spend more for incarceration or legal process. Or when we have people in California now, illegal aliens getting medical benefits. The illegal aliens in California under Obamacare are getting more choice and access to medical care than our veterans. That's ridiculous. So these types of things I'm not worried about. We just have to make sure that we get it right, that we protect the country. And, part of the reason of government is you have to spend money on certain things, roads and bridges, making sure that we're secure. So that's just what we're lacking in Washington isn't money. It's the will to do the job. And I would be one person that would be focused on, for instance, defending our country and securing our border.
Are you concerned at all about, the presidential debate that was held on Sunday? There are a number of Republicans that are saying they're not going to endorse the Republican presidential candidate. Does that concern you at all, being, a Republican, whether that'll have some ripple effect in any campaigns, or what do you think?
Well, most of the people I think that I've heard saying they're not going to support the nominee would be considered more establishment types, people in Washington who maybe are a little resistant to seeing big change. But what I took from the debate the other night is that one candidate, Hillary Clinton, has been in that political arena a long time, and she's made things worse, much like Tim Walz has made things worse. And the other candidate had big, bold solutions and changes in order to help our country. So I think when people focus on the issues, both personalities, there's something to be desired. But when you look at the issues, when you realize that if Hillary Clinton wins, we lose the Supreme Court for generations, and we're going to fundamentally change our country, I think people get it, that this is a huge contrast election, and that we're either going to go one way or the other. And so I certainly hope the Republican candidate wins.
Thanks, Jim, for coming all the way from Blue Earth to be with us today.
Happy to be here, Gordy. Thank you for the chance.
Appreciate it. That's a little bit of a drive there from Blue Earth all the way here to be with us on AM Minnesota. That concludes today's edition of AM Minnesota on KDHL AM in Faribault, Minnesota.